So every time you see one of these huge drops, that's Redis doing work, looking for keys and evicting them while Redis is doing that work. So we're not doing anything else on Redis, and that means that clients are waiting. This is a whole bunch of keys that are being expired all at once, like in the span of a few seconds. By reducing the TTL, we're hoping to spread that out more. So keys naturally expire like gradually, and there's a mechanism in Redis to do that on the main thread. Yeah, I think every call, but probably Igor can correct me on that. So we want to make use of that mechanism instead of the mechanism at max memory that is supposed to guarantee that we stay below it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
So what we've changed, like the change to 12 hours has reduced the events of like where we reach max memory to 2. Like we had 2 yesterday at 12 hours. And we're going to go a little bit lower to 8 hours to like get rid of the last 2, but also to see what the impact on the cache hit rate is. Like if there's not a big change in that, then it's safe to go lower. And we want to reduce the overall memory usage to be somewhere below like the 70% usage that we currently have as a target. So if we have that, then we can include Redis cache into capacity planning again, which means we can we will preemptively get notified before this happens again. Yeah, that's what we're doing. Like, so I don't like, we're now at about, what was it? 90%. Like the dip here is just below 90%, which is still quite far off from the 70% we want to be at. So the reduction to 8 hours TTL is going to help there, but I don't think it'll be enough to be able to include Redis cache into capacity planning. And the team has discussed 3 IDs, 3 or 4 IDs. Yes. So 4 things that we could look into to improve the memory usage, to reduce the memory usage even more. Even though we are not seeing the negative side effects of max memory anymore, we do expect natural growth of the cache. So we want to have some headroom there. The things that we are going to discuss is, now that we know where the ceiling, the maximum memory used is, we can vertically scale the machine and increase max memory to accommodate for that. I think that's kind of like the easiest solution, and I think we should do it regardless. Then the second thing was what we were going to do first, before we knew where the ceiling was, but now we do, and that's slicing off a new Redis instance. Maybe we should still do that, but not for Redis cache, and focus on Redis persistent instead, but that's something to discuss. And the third option is what we actually want to do, and that's like learning how to run Redis cluster, because that's what we actually want for these things, instead of slicing off functional shards. And then the fourth thing to investigate is what other dials we have in the Rails active support caching thing, and how they would affect memory usage. Any comments on that? Thoughts, ideas?
Well, I do have a question. So with continually slicing off a new shard, so I know we've done all of the prep work. I mean, part of what we're doing as well is we're moving the Redis instances into Kubernetes now. And part of slicing off that new shard was also setting up the structure in Kubernetes to be able to take, like, to put all of the pieces in place to have a shard in Kubernetes. If we go and change tact to do this for Redis persistent instead, I'm assuming that the majority of it is just reusable. It's just renaming a bunch of stuff to be more appropriate for the shard.
Yes, and renaming the thing.
Do we already know what we would take off Redis persistent? What we would shard off?
I think Alejandro has a better idea, but I don't think anybody on the call has already looked into that. Maybe Sylvester already took a look, because I know you were looking into zonal clusters.
I took a quick look, but I'm just mainly following your discussion with Alejandro, which is to
Okay.
portion out some of the keys into another Redis.
So the thing that we've moved to Redis persistent recently was also Sidekick related stuff that can't be in the Sidekick shard when we want Sidekick zonal clusters. So we could move that stuff out into a new functional shard, but all in all, except for the duplicate jobs, it's not that much in terms of CPU usage, because we've seen the drops before when going the drops and increases before when going from Redis Sidekick to Redis persistent. So we might want to look at something else instead. Yeah, I don't know.
One comment here. One thing we need to be careful with is we don't really have that much experience with persistent storage on Redis in Kubernetes in particular. And when we chose which Redises to go with next, that was explicitly
cache.
One where we don't care about data storage on disk, so that we can kind of eliminate that scope. So that's something to keep in mind here as well.
Yeah, there's rate limiting would be the next. No, so there's the functional slice.
I've got the thing open in front of me here. Let me quickly share the screen with the list of.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the Redis instances where we don't care about how persistent the data is.
Well, this was the list. I mean, this is what we're doing at the moment, the registry cache. That's what Frameworks is doing. Then this is what we were looking at in projections. This is the one we're talking about now in terms of we don't know how persistence is going to work there. Then the next one on the list was rate limiting trace chunks. But it feels like we need to, instead of just migrating Redis cache as is, that was where we were going to do cluster as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Like we can do some functional partitioning now and then do cluster later, right?
Yeah, so we can also bring them back together if we decide that it's too many Redises, like too complicated.
Well, that's what I'm trying to think about now is like we've gotten a fair amount of the way with creating this second instance. It's a case of what are we going to use it for that advances both us getting everything over to Kubernetes, but also advances not having the saturation problems on cache and persistent. And it seems like Redis cache's saturation problems are largely going to be resolved by the TTL and increasing the boxes. So then it's about looking at Redis persistent, but it feels like we've got to answer a bunch of questions about persistence on Kubernetes before we can actually commit to doing that one.
There's also the reason that we would switch to persistent is because of the urgency. So we need to do something with Redis persistent.
Yes.
The other solution there is like in like doing more investigation on what we can do, because migrating is just like the thing that came up because, well,
is Redis cluster also a potential solution for Redis persistent?
Yes.
But
we know even less about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've then got kind of the persistence aspect, which is a new one, plus Redis cluster, which is a new one. So if we can split that.
Plus the Redis on Kubernetes, which we don't have that much experience with yet.
Right. But I mean, I guess the goal of this quarter is to gain some expertise there.
So what were, and feel free to, I'm looking for feedback. Because we're already so much of the way with having the registry instance there, what if we made that instance be used for rate limiting instead? We still get the second instance in Kubernetes. We've still advanced the project of getting that further.
You mean the repository one?
No, I mean changing, like not actually partitioning the repository.
Yes, but you mentioned
Yes, sorry,
registry.
Yes, I'm looking at the word registry and that comes out of my mouth. So instead of using the second setup for repository cache, we use it for rate limiting instead. And we then continue figuring out how to get Redis cluster to work. Or we figure out how to get Redis persistent onto Kubernetes. I'm trying to figure out what we should use that second instance for. If we must keep going with doing repository cache, or if we should use it for something else.
Repository cache is not complicated to do, but it also doesn't, like, it won't gain us as much as we like. I don't think we will need it after increasing the box.
And then we're just going to land up with another thing that we need to manage and maintain.
Yeah, we could figure out rate limiting is also simpler because it doesn't really need that many code changes for Rails. Like it's most like, I think we can just take the hit and just leave the data where it is because it's just rate limiting data.
Well, that's it. I don't think there's going to be a big migration.
It's just a configuration change as far as like
that's
spinning up the box and the configuration change.
In fact, we did initially decide that we wouldn't do a migration for that and just switch the config, even potentially do it gradually.
Okay, shall we go with that then, of doing rate limiting instead? And then we rather spend the time advancing other knowledge in terms of persistence and Redis cluster?
I think we should, but I don't think that we can stop on the persistent. Like we can't just say, okay, we are not confident enough to do something about persistent right now. Let's do something else until the problem's bigger.
Until the problem gets so bad that it's like S1 bad. No, we have to do something about Redis persistent.
One question there. What is the resource? Is it just CPU? Okay. And
I think I haven't read through, but Alejandro said that there's no other box that we can switch to that would help there because of the single, like more concurrency is not going to.
And that was confirmed by someone else on that issue as well. I can't remember which other SRE chimed in there, but someone else confirmed that going up to a different box doesn't make any difference.
And do we have any subset of stuff that we can move that doesn't require persistence?
E-tag caching?
How much is that? Is it enough to make
I
a
don't know. But I know that it's like a thing that isn't persistent, that is, but I don't think, wait, CPU might. I think we would need to look into what.
Yeah, so maybe doing some traffic analysis on Redis persistent would give us a better idea of whether there is room to move anything there. Okay. And then we can kind of focus on something that has more impact than Redis repository cache, which is what we're doing now.
Yeah. Okay, I will write up an issue. I'll send out information about making this change, because I'm hesitant to continue with repository cache if we know that we've actually solved the problem in another way. Like, let's rather create the instance for something that needs it a bit more, and let's rather use our time to get ahead of persistent for one thing. Okay, I'm so glad we figured out the Redis cache stuff. Like watching all the graphs change when the TTL changed, it was great.
I had one question about that. I mean, we've talked in the past about how this is basically a bug in Redis, or like a case that Redis itself is not handling very well. And I think there's been some upstream discussions around this and some changes upstream that didn't help. Have we considered maybe opening a new discussion and posting our findings and see if the Redis maintainers are interested in improving this situation?
I think if someone wanted to take the time to provide the information, or provide what the knowledge that we've learned to them, I'm happy for someone to take the time to do that. But I am just very aware of how much time we have to resolve things, and I'm kind of worried about Redis persistent. So I think as long as we can still be making progress to resolve that, I wouldn't mind if someone wanted to write it up and engage with them.
I'm not opposed to doing that, but I don't know what kind of information they will need to figure this out. So I'll start with an issue in their issue tracker and then see what comes out.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking. Sorry, just thinking sort of a little more long term, and you know, if this can be addressed, that'll potentially benefit us in the long term, and it'll potentially benefit everyone using Redis, and can also make for a good story, which I think is worth something as well.
Yeah. I was wondering if anyone remembers like how the conversation about adjusting the TTL started. Where did that idea come from? And
Jakob in one of the calls. No, we mentioned it. Matt mentioned it first, and like one of the like investigation calls.
okay.
But then we didn't pursue the biggest chunk because all the TTLs are set all over the place. It depends how you access the cache. You can do it through the Rails thing, and this is only adjusting the Rails thing, like the default.
Okay.
Yeah. And we didn't know how low we needed to go. But then, yeah, I think Jakob came back to it. So because it's the smaller change to make, and that's where.
It's just interesting because it seems like it was a very simple. I mean, I know it takes a long time to think of simple things, but it was a simple change to make, and it's we've been having this problem for quite a while, and I was just wondering if there was something particular that made us like it triggered this series of thoughts of, oh, let's just change the TTL. But what you say there is it's set all over the place, and maybe that's also something that we can look at, is how to make that easier to make that more discoverable.
There's also the thing that we need to think about after is what do we do for self-managed installations? Like now we've set it there for us, and I think it's a more sensible default than the 2 weeks. Like if we land on 8 hours, I think that's a more sensible. That makes more sense than the 2 weeks that we had before. Do we want to roll that out to self-managed or not?
Well, the thing is, if we roll that out to self-managed, we need to give them tools to be able to make the choice of what to set it to. And I think
same as our tools, set an environment variable and document that.
What I mean is how to make the assessment of what to set it to, like how to know how much is in their cache, how to know how if they're reaching max memory.
I think we might look at GitLab.com and say that 8 hours is still an acceptable hit ratio. Like I don't think that the traffic of another busy instance will be that much different, like in that sense.
But it would be dependent on what size their machine is that they're running the Redis cache instance on.
Yeah, but we're reducing it, so then they will have more headroom on their machine.
Oh, regardless, that's true. Okay. Well, I'm still really glad that we're making progress on this one. It's nice to see this coming together. So. Cool. Anything else on Redis cache?
May I just ask a very basic question? I heard about Redis cluster and functional shards. You mentioned what? How is that different between functional shards and Redis cluster?
I'm happy to take this one. Functional partitioning is basically us carving off a subset of the key space, and then on the client side having multiple Redis connections. Whereas Redis cluster with a capital C is the native Redis clustering solution, where it's got built-in key space sharding and kind of handles it somewhat transparently, but it operates very differently to the Redis Sentinel based setup that we have right now. And so there's a lot of operational unknowns. And so that's why we've been a little hesitant to just move to that, right? And there's also a lot of caveats because you can't do cross-key or very limited cross-key operations. And so the application needs to support Redis cluster as well. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I guess so. So basically, functional sharding or partitioning is basically the logic in the client side, so from the application side. All right, thank you.
We have started some work on using Redis cluster in terms of we validate that in tests we validate that no cross slot, so cross key commands are executed, so we don't execute commands that would go to two different shards in the cluster.
I've got a quick question regarding the Kubernetes setup. If you're having let's say a persistent Redis, then if it's would it be in one of the nodes, or would it be like a Sentinel setup where it's replicated across 3 nodes? Because I was thinking of like cross zone networking and traffic, things like that.
Yeah, so it's a Sentinel based setup. So all of the existing VM-based Redises and also all of the new Kubernetes ones are following the same replicated setup, where we have 3 replicas in 3 different zones, and Sentinel handles the service discovery or the primary discovery and the failover for that.
When you said 3, do you mean 1 in each or 3 in each?
1 in each.
Okay, got it.
While we're talking on Redis, Igor, did you by any chance notice the failover that happened yesterday or 2 days ago? And what caused it? No.
No, haven't seen that.
Then still need to look into that then.
Which Redis was this?
Cache went from 03 to 01, I think, or the other way around, something like that.
If we were with setting them all up with the Sentinel-based setup, once we've done the research for going to Redis cluster, if we decide that that's actually the best thing long term, we'll then have to switch everything over from the Sentinel-based to the cluster to Redis cluster-based. So then it probably also makes sense to start looking at Redis cluster now, in the hopes that the new ones get done in Redis cluster way, rather than doing all of the things in Kubernetes in the Sentinel based and then having to switch all of them.
Yeah, I mean, if we have capacity to do it now, by all means. But I guess in my mind, it's always been kind of a let's gather expertise on the Kubernetes side first and kind of do cluster once we're there.
For sure. No, I do remember that. Okay. Well, is there anything else anyone would like to cover on the call today? Alrighty, well, I'm going to say thank you very much for everyone for joining. Hope you have a good rest of your day, and looking forward to catching up soon. Bye.